We're running a little bit behind schedule, but we have got a period of time for some questions. So any questions for any of our speakers? Yeah.
Hi, so this is a question for John. I loved your presentation. Thank you, it's fantastic. I was really interested in the level of dialogue and communication that you have with your audience. It's incredibly impressive. And I just wondered what your thought, because I wondered, is that a different relationship with your audience because you're working at the FT and essentially your audience are actually your funders? Do you think that's a different relationship that perhaps others where the relationship is a bit different could learn from? It's a half-formed thought, but it's just something that really struck me about what you were saying.
Yeah, sure. Great question. Honestly, I think the reason I often gravitate to posting things and reading things on social media is because that is then a much broader audience. We are blessed at the FT with people who understand things like the difference between mean and median and maybe even a standard deviation or even a spline. But the key thing in the pandemic was the realization that the audience for this stuff was everyone. And the moment I'll never forget was an old school friend who I hadn't spoken to in a decade getting in touch with me saying that her mum had just WhatsApped her one of our charts. And I don't think that would have happened if we hadn't had that focus on communication. I don't think people would have been WhatsApping each other sterile line charts without that text on them. So yeah, despite being at the FT, I always try to imagine what just the average person in the street, to the extent that exists, is going to be thinking about what they see. Because I think if I care enough about something to feel it's worth writing about and analysing and making charts on, then I want as many people as possible to understand that, not just people who read the FT.
Thanks, John. Any other questions? Yep, Fred.
I've got a question for Ed. Ed, when your organisation decides to take action and put out a statement or statements from scientists or hold a press conference and that, you outlined all the benefits of it, which was great. Do you ever do any kind of risk assessment and think, hang on, are we just going to amplify this story that a lot of news organisations might not be paying attention to? And when they see you stepping in and saying, oh, everyone, let's damp this down, they'll go, hang on, what's this controversial thing they're damping down in the first place? And then give attention to something that may not have got attention in the first place.
That's a really good point. And yeah, that's something that we consider on like almost a daily basis. So the way we kind of look at it is that, like I mentioned, most of the way that journalists find out about a study will be from a press release from the university or the funder or the journal. So once that study has been press released and is already in the journalist's inbox, we can't take that back. They've already seen that story and might cover it. So what we can do in those cases, especially when a lot of these stories are you can't really ignore them, like the suicidality and weight loss drugs ones is too good of a headline for a journalist to ignore, so we know they're going to cover it. So in our case, what we would rather do is, even if, like you say, we can't really know for certain, but we might actually alert journalists to this story that otherwise might not have seen by sending out comments from scientists on it. We can't know that for sure, but I'm sure that has happened. But what we can do in those cases is make that story the right. Well, we can help guide the journalists and help inform them by giving the thoughts of the scientists as to what the limitations are. So even if otherwise, at least the coverage that there is will be better informed as a result. But as you say, yeah, I'm sure that we might have, in some cases, increased coverage of these kind of stories, but at least the coverage that is there will be better as a result. So yeah, it's something that we're always kind of thinking about in our office all the time, but that's kind of where we've landed on that as a whole.
Thanks. Yeah.
Ed, I had another question just about influencers. So you obviously deal with a lot of traditionals, and you mentioned you've got a really solid, knowledgeable set of like scientific journalists and media that you regularly deal with. But I can't help but think weight loss drugs, and there's so many things that kind of we get health messages and advice that could be kind of trickled down through influencers and sort of like that new breed of sort of citizen journalist, I suppose. have you given thought to how you might link scientists up with sort of, I guess, that much more different type of low-level journalism, and how those messages might work and be helpful to people?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And it's something that we're constantly discussing right now, is kind of whether there's a space for us in this, or whether they should be a completely different organization called the kind of social media science media center kind of set up, that's much more kind of geared towards helping those influencers. There's a few things that kind of we're thinking about at that in the moment. So firstly, these influencers are very different to journalists as far as we can tell. Then they're often not journalist trained. Journalists have a set of standards. They're regulated. So will they behave with the information in the same way? A lot of them, as far as we know, aren't on the kind of embargoed press release list to receive scientific studies, say from Nature, JAMA, etc. They're often kind of news aggregators or responding to news. So a lot of them aren't kind of setting their news agenda like the current journalists at the national news outlets. They're often just following what other journalists have written and using that to aggregate it. So the second question is, would they actually want to use our content? And the second one is, would they actually want to use our content anyway? But it's something that we're really actively listening to, and we've had a lot of discussions in our team about. There's also a few different science media centers around the world. So I didn't mention that we've got colleagues in Ireland, Germany, Spain, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, and they're all also think about the same things. And I think a few of those science media centers are setting up pilots this year where they're having, because another point is we need to make sure that we're kind of getting the right kind of influencers on our list that actually would want to use our content and are probably adhering to those journalistic standards that we so admire at the SMC. So it's a lot of work and a lot of thought for all those reasons, but it's definitely something that we're considering. And like you say, even though like I showed on the screen in the stats earlier, a lot of the public is still getting their kind of information from these traditional news sources, that there might be a potential gap of maybe younger people that we're not reaching at the moment with this really important information, like you say, on weight loss drugs, etc., that we could help by getting to these influencers. Although also I should say that a lot of we did some recent polling, and a lot of the public, even if they say that they're getting their kind of information from some kind of social media, what that also can mean influencers, but it can also mean still following traditional news sources on social media. So just because if a question is worded in the wrong way, then you might think that they're just looking at social media, but that might be looking at a BBC TikTok or an FT TikTok or an FT article on social media or anything else. So we need to be careful about how we think about that question as well. But yeah, watch this space. We're constantly thinking about that.
So, Timandra, I'm always in awe of somebody who can communicate data on radio, because I'm a very visual person, and that doesn't really work. You're talking about the emphasis of narrative over numbers, so I just wondered, does that balance between narrative and number change depending on whether you're radio versus in print, or does it stay the same?
I think balancing narrative and numbers can change depending also on the subject matter, but in a sense, I think that as a journalist, you can talk about facts in the same way you could talk about numbers, because in the same way you say, well, the facts should speak for themselves, but they don't. They need a story, and you should give the audience the facts and let them make their own mind up. But if you don't give them a story, they won't listen. So, I mean, in that sense, I think the fact that it's numbers is not crucial. On radio, you're right. I mean, I'm also a very visual person, but they do say about radio that it's got the best special effects because they happen between the listener's ears. So what you need to do is let the listener create the images in their mind, and there's different ways to do that with sound and description and analogy. So yeah, it can be tricky, but a lot of people do it. More or less does it very well. Other people do it very well.
Yeah, all the podcasters as well. Yeah.
All the podcasters.
Yeah, great. So we're running over time. So can we thank our speakers?